Marcus Thompson walked through the crowded subway station with the same quiet confidence he had carried for the past 15 years. His plain black t-shirt and worn jeans gave no hint of his background. To everyone around him, he looked like just another guy heading home from work in downtown Chicago. The evening rush hour pressed people together like sardines. Marcus kept his head down, earbuds in, listening to an audiobook about gardening. After 2 decades in the Navy SEALs, he had traded his combat boots for sneakers and his rifle for pruning shears. These days, he ran a small landscaping business and preferred the peace of working with plants over the chaos of his former life. 3 young men noticed him first. They stood near the platform edge, dressed in expensive streetwear with gold chains glinting under the fluorescent lights. Tyler, the apparent leader, was 19 with bleached hair and tattoos crawling up his arms. His friends, Jake and Connor, flanked him like bodyguards, though they looked more like they belonged in a high school hallway than on the streets. "Look at this old dude," Tyler whispered to his friends, nodding toward Marcus. "Bet he's got some cash on him." Marcus felt their eyes on him but kept walking. In his SEAL training, situational awareness had been drilled into him until it became second nature. He could sense when someone was watching him, when danger lurked nearby. Right now, every instinct told him these 3 were trouble. The train arrived with a screech of metal on metal. Marcus stepped aboard and found a seat near the back. The car was packed with tired commuters, office workers checking their phones, and students with heavy backpacks. Tyler and his crew pushed their way through the crowd and positioned themselves near Marcus. "Excuse me, sir," Tyler said, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "Nice watch you got there." Marcus glanced down at his simple digital watch, a $20 piece he had bought at a drugstore. He looked up at Tyler and gave a slight nod, then returned his attention to his phone. "I said, nice watch," Tyler repeated, louder this time. A few passengers looked over, then quickly looked away. Nobody wanted to get involved. "Thank you," Marcus said simply, his voice calm and even. Tyler's friends snickered. They thought they had found an easy target, a middle-aged man who seemed eager to avoid confrontation. They had no idea they were looking at someone who had survived firefights in 3 different countries and had earned more combat medals than they had brain cells between them. "You know what?" Tyler said, sitting down uninvited in the empty seat next to Marcus. "I think that watch would look better on me. Why don't you hand it over?" Marcus slowly removed his earbuds and turned to face Tyler. His gray eyes were steady and unblinking. "I don't think so." The simple refusal hung in the air between them. Tyler's face flushed red. He was used to people backing down, used to getting his way through intimidation. This quiet stranger was not following the script. "Maybe you didn't hear me right," Tyler said, his voice getting harder. "I wasn't asking." Jake and Connor moved closer, trying to box Marcus in. The other passengers seemed to shrink into their seats, desperately avoiding eye contact. Marcus noticed an elderly woman clutching her purse tighter, a businessman pretending to be very interested in his newspaper. Marcus had been in situations like this before, though usually the stakes were much higher. He remembered a night in Afghanistan when he and his team were surrounded by hostile forces. The key then, as now, was to stay calm and think 3 moves ahead. "I heard you just fine," Marcus said, his voice still eerily calm. "And, like I said, I don't think so." Tyler's hand moved toward his jacket pocket. Marcus caught the motion instantly. In the Special Forces, that kind of movement usually meant someone was reaching for a weapon. His body tensed slightly, muscles coiling like a spring, but his face remained relaxed. "You see, old man," Tyler continued, "this is how it works. You give me what I want, or my friends, and I make sure you have a very bad day." Marcus looked around the subway car. The train was approaching the next station. He calculated distances, exits, potential weapons. The metal poles, the hard plastic seats, even a discarded coffee cup could become tools if necessary. But he hoped it wouldn't come to that. "Son," Marcus said quietly, "you really don't want to do this." Tyler laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the confined space. "Oh, I think I do." "Jake, show this guy we're serious." Jake, a lanky kid with nervous energy, cracked his knuckles loudly. He had probably watched too many action movies and thought intimidation was all about dramatic gestures. Connor, shorter and stockier, reached into his backpack. Marcus watched their movements with the same attention a chess master gives to his opponent's pieces. Tyler was the leader but also the most emotional, likely to make mistakes. Jake was all show, probably never been in a real fight. Connor was the quiet one, which made him potentially the most dangerous. The train slowed as it approached the station. Through the windows, Marcus could see people waiting on the platform, unaware of the tension building inside the car. He made a decision. "Listen," Marcus said, standing up slowly with his hands visible. "I'm getting off at this stop. Why don't you boys find something better to do with your evening?" Tyler jumped up, blocking his path. "Nobody said you could leave. Sit back down." The train came to a stop with a gentle bump. The doors opened with a pneumatic hiss. A few passengers got off quickly, sensing trouble. New passengers started to board, then seemed to think better of it when they saw the standoff. "Move," Tyler said, poking Marcus in the chest with his finger. It was the wrong move. Marcus had spent years learning to control his reflexes, to think before acting. But Tyler's aggressive gesture triggered something deeper than thought. In a movement so quick it seemed like magic, Marcus grabbed Tyler's extended finger and twisted it in a direction fingers weren't meant to go. Tyler yelped in pain and surprise. His cocky demeanor cracked instantly. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, his voice still calm but now carrying an edge of authority that made everyone in the car pay attention. "You're going to apologize to every person on this train for disturbing their evening. Then, you and your friends are going to get off at this stop and think very carefully about the choices you make." Tyler's eyes watered from the pain in his finger, but his pride hurt worse. "You can't do this. Jake. Connor. Get him." Jake hesitated. Something in Marcus's posture, in the way he held himself, suggested this wasn't going to go the way they had planned. Connor's hand was still in his backpack, but he seemed frozen. The train doors started to close. Marcus released Tyler's finger and took a step back, giving them space to leave. "This is your chance," Marcus said. "Walk away." Tyler rubbed his finger and glared at Marcus with pure hatred. "You have no idea who you're messing with, old man. This isn't over." The three young men reluctantly stepped off the train, Tyler still nursing his finger. As the doors closed and the train pulled away, Marcus could see them through the window, Tyler gesturing angrily while his friends tried to calm him down. Marcus sat back down and put his earbuds in. Around him, the other passengers slowly returned to their phones and newspapers, but he could feel their curious glances. A woman across the aisle gave him a small nod of approval. As the train carried him toward home, Marcus reflected on what had just happened. In his military days, that kind of confrontation would have ended very differently. But civilian life had taught him the value of restraint, of using only as much force as necessary. He thought about Tyler and his friends. Young, angry, looking for easy targets to make themselves feel powerful. Marcus had been young once too, though his youth had been spent learning discipline and purpose in the military. These kids seemed to have neither. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through messages from his landscaping clients. Mrs. Rodriguez wanted her roses pruned next week. The Johnsons needed their lawn aerated before winter. Simple, honest work that helped people beautify their homes and neighborhoods. He had found peace in this new life, away from the violence and chaos of his military career. But sometimes, like tonight, the old skills came in handy. The training never really went away, it just waited quietly until needed. The train pulled into his station. As Marcus walked up the steps to street level, he wondered if Tyler would learn from this encounter or if his bruised ego would drive him to seek revenge. In Marcus's experience, bullies came in two types, those who backed down when confronted by someone stronger, and those who doubled down on their aggression. Something told him Tyler was the second type. Marcus walked the 6 blocks to his small apartment, past the corner deli where Mr. Kim always waved from behind the counter, past the playground where neighborhood kids played until their parents called them in for dinner. This was his world now, quiet, predictable, peaceful. He climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment and unlocked the door. His cat, Ranger, greeted him with a demanding meow. Marcus opened a can of food for the orange tabby, then made himself a simple dinner of grilled chicken and vegetables. As he ate, Marcus thought about calling his old teammate Rodriguez, who lived across town. They met for coffee once a month to catch up and remember the friends they had lost. Rodriguez would get a kick out of hearing about 3 wannabe tough guys who picked the wrong target. But Marcus decided to keep the story to himself for now. In his experience, the less attention drawn to these kinds of incidents, the better. He had handled the situation without anyone getting seriously hurt, and that was what mattered. After dinner, Marcus sat on his small balcony and watched the sun set behind the city skyline. Tomorrow he would wake up early, load his truck with tools and supplies, and spend the day making people's gardens beautiful. It was a good life, an honest life. He had no idea that Tyler was already planning his revenge. 3 neighborhoods away, Tyler sat in his older brother's apartment, ice pack pressed against his swollen finger, his pride wounded worse than his hand. Jake and Connor sat on the couch, still processing what had happened on the train. "That old man got lucky," Tyler muttered. "Caught me off guard." "Maybe we should just forget about it," Connor suggested quietly. He had been the one to see something dangerous in Marcus's eyes, something that suggested they had messed with the wrong person. "Forget about it?" Tyler's voice rose. "That nobody humiliated me in front of everyone. Made me look weak." Jake nodded along, though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to face Marcus again. "So what do we do?" Tyler's eyes glittered with malice. "We find out who he is. Where he lives. Then, we show him what happens when you disrespect Tyler Morrison." Connor shifted uncomfortably. "How are we supposed to find one guy in a city of millions?" Tyler smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Easy. We go back to that train tomorrow night. Same time, same route. Guys like that, they're creatures of habit. He'll be there." As Tyler outlined his plan for revenge, Marcus was settling into bed with a book about organic farming techniques. He had put the incident on the train out of his mind, focused instead on tomorrow's work schedule. If Marcus had known what Tyler was planning, he might have handled things differently on the train. But, in his world, conflicts were resolved and people moved on with their lives. He had yet to learn that some people never let go of a grudge. The stage was set for a much more serious confrontation, one that would teach Tyler and his friends exactly why Marcus Thompson was the wrong person to challenge. The next evening, Marcus finished loading his truck after a long day of installing a garden irrigation system for a retired teacher in the suburbs. His hands were dirty from working with soil and pipe fittings, but he felt the deep satisfaction that came from honest work well done. Mrs. Chen had been so happy with the results that she'd insisted on sending him home with a bag of homegrown tomatoes. As he drove back into the city, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his neighbor asking if he could help move a refrigerator over the weekend. These were the kinds of problems he preferred now, simple, solvable, with clear solutions. The subway platform was just as crowded as the night before. Marcus bought his ticket and waited for the train, scrolling through emails from potential clients. A young couple wanted a complete backyard makeover. A small restaurant needed help with their rooftop herb garden. Life was good. He didn't notice the 3 figures watching him from across the platform. Tyler had indeed returned, just as he'd promised his friends. But, this time, he hadn't come alone. Along with Jake and Connor, he'd brought his older brother Danny, a lean man with dead eyes and a criminal record that stretched back to his teens. Danny carried himself differently than the younger men. There was a dangerous stillness about him that spoke of real violence, not playground posturing. "That's him," Tyler whispered, pointing at Marcus. "The old man who thinks he's tough." Danny studied Marcus with the cold assessment of a predator. "Doesn't look like much." "That's what we thought," Jake said nervously. "But he did something to Tyler's finger that I couldn't even see." Danny smiled, but it was the smile of a shark. Probably just got lucky. Most of these middle-aged guys watch too many action movies. Think they're tough until they meet the real thing. Tyler's finger was still sore, wrapped in a bandage that he'd deliberately made more obvious than necessary. He wanted people to see that he'd been injured, wanted them to ask what happened so he could tell them how some stranger had assaulted him unprovoked. "So what's the plan?" Connor asked, though part of him hoped someone would suggest they just go home. "Simple," Danny said, checking his watch. "We follow him onto the train. Find out where he lives. Then, we pay him a visit when he's not expecting it." The train arrived, and Marcus stepped aboard, taking a seat near the middle this time. He'd noticed the same group of young men on the platform and had a nagging feeling that it wasn't a coincidence. His military training had taught him that coincidences were often anything but. Tyler and his crew spread out through the car, trying to look casual. Danny positioned himself near the doors so Marcus couldn't leave easily. Tyler sat several seats behind Marcus, staring at the back of his head with unconcealed hatred. Marcus felt their presence like a weight on his shoulders. He'd hoped the incident from the previous night was over, but apparently Tyler was the type to hold grudges. Marcus had dealt with his kind before, young men whose pride mattered more than their safety. 3 stops passed in tense silence. Marcus could see reflections in the windows, keeping track of where each of the 4 men was positioned. Danny concerned him most. Unlike the others, this one moved with purpose and discipline. This wasn't some angry kid, this was someone who had done real harm to real people. Marcus made his decision. Instead of getting off at his usual stop, he stayed on the train. If they were following him, he wasn't going to lead them to his neighborhood, to the people he'd grown to care about. Better to deal with this somewhere else. The train continued deeper into the industrial part of the city, where warehouses and empty lots replaced apartment buildings and shops. Fewer people got on at each stop, and more got off. Soon the car was nearly empty except for Marcus and his unwanted shadows. At a stop called Riverside Industrial, Marcus stood up and headed for the doors. It was perfect for what he suspected was coming: plenty of space, no innocent bystanders, and several escape routes if things went bad. As he stepped onto the platform, Marcus heard footsteps behind him. No surprise there. The platform was long and dimly lit, surrounded by chain-link fences and abandoned buildings. A perfect place for the kind of confrontation Tyler was looking for. Marcus walked toward the far end of the platform, away from the few security cameras he could see. If this was going to happen, he wanted to control where and how. "Hey!" Tyler called out when they were far enough from the station entrance. "Old man! We're not done from yesterday." Marcus stopped walking and turned around slowly. The 4 men spread out in a semicircle, cutting off his escape routes back to the station. Danny stepped forward, and Marcus could see the bulge of a knife handle under his jacket. "My little brother says you hurt him," Danny said, his voice casual but his eyes deadly serious. "Says you grabbed his finger and twisted it." "Your little brother was trying to rob me," Marcus replied calmly. "I defended myself." Tyler stepped forward, his face red with anger. "I wasn't robbing nobody. I just asked to see your watch. After you told me I was going to have a bad day if I didn't give it to you," Marcus said. "Where I come from, that's called robbery." Danny laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Where you come from? And where's that, old man? Suburbia? Office building somewhere?" Marcus didn't answer. He was calculating distances, noting the positions of potential weapons: a broken piece of concrete near the fence, a metal pipe that had fallen from construction work. His military training was kicking in, suppressing emotion and focusing on tactical realities. "See, here's the thing," Danny continued, pulling out a switchblade and clicking it open. "Nobody disrespects my family. Nobody hurts my little brother," and walks away. Jake and Connor looked nervous now that the knife was out. This had escalated beyond their comfort zone. They'd signed up to intimidate some middle-aged commuter, not to witness a stabbing. "Danny, maybe we should just," Connor started. "Shut up," Danny snapped. "This needs to be handled properly. Marcus looked at the four men facing him and felt a familiar calm settle over his mind. This was the zone he'd entered countless times in combat situations, a place where time seemed to slow down and every detail became crystal clear. "You really don't want to do this," Marcus said quietly. "Oh, I really do," Danny replied, stepping closer with the knife held low and ready. Marcus had been hoping to avoid this moment, but Tyler and his brother had made their choice. Sometimes violence was unavoidable, and, when that happened, the key was to end it as quickly and decisively as possible. Danny lunged forward with the knife, aiming for Marcus's stomach. To the others, what happened next seemed impossible. Marcus moved like liquid lightning. His left hand caught Danny's wrist, stopping the knife inches from his body. His right hand came up in a short, sharp strike to Danny's elbow. There was a wet crack, and Danny screamed as his arm bent in a direction arms weren't meant to bend. The knife clattered to the concrete as Danny fell to his knees, cradling his broken arm. Tyler, Jake, and Connor stood frozen in shock. The whole thing had taken less than 3 seconds. "Anyone else?" Marcus asked, his voice still calm but now carrying an edge of authority that made the 3 remaining attackers take a step back. Tyler looked down at his brother, who was whimpering in pain on the ground. "Danny? Danny, get up!" But Danny wasn't getting up anytime soon. Marcus had destroyed his elbow with surgical precision, the kind of move that took years of training to execute properly. "What are you?" Jake whispered, his voice shaking. Marcus picked up the switchblade and folded it closed with one hand. "Someone you should have left alone." Tyler's face cycled through confusion, fear, and rage. His pride wouldn't let him back down, even with his older brother disabled at his feet. "You think you're so tough?" Tyler yelled, reaching into his jacket. Marcus saw the gun before Tyler had fully drawn it. In one smooth motion, he closed the distance between them, his hand clamping down on Tyler's wrist like a steel trap. Tyler tried to point the gun at Marcus, but found his arm completely immobilized. "Let me give you some advice," Marcus said, applying just enough pressure to make Tyler gasp in pain. "When someone shows you they're better at violence than you are, the smart move is to walk away." With his free hand, Marcus grabbed the gun and twisted it out of Tyler's grip so effortlessly that Tyler barely realized what had happened until he found himself staring down the barrel of his own weapon. Jake and Connor raised their hands without being asked. Marcus ejected the magazine and cleared the chamber with practiced efficiency. He pocketed the ammunition and threw the empty gun into a storm drain 20 feet away. "Now," Marcus said, looking at Tyler, Jake, and Connor while Danny continued to moan on the ground, "you have a choice. You can call an ambulance for your friend here and then go home and forget this ever happened. Or you can keep escalating this situation and find out exactly how much worse things can get for you." Tyler looked between his injured brother and the man who had just disarmed him like he was a child with a toy. For the first time in his life, he was face to face with someone genuinely dangerous, and every instinct he had was screaming at him to run. "We need to get Danny to a hospital," Connor said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Good choice. Call 911. Tell them your friend fell down some stairs and broke his arm. Leave out everything else." "What about you?" Tyler asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "I'm going to get on the next train and go home. And if I ever see any of you again, if you ever come anywhere near me or anyone I care about, we're going to have a much more serious conversation. Do you understand?" Tyler nodded quickly, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Good," Marcus said. He started to walk away, then stopped. "Tyler." The young man looked up with fearful eyes. "Next time someone tells you that you're picking a fight with the wrong person, listen to them." Marcus walked back toward the station, leaving the 4 would-be attackers to deal with the consequences of their choices. Behind him, he could hear Connor calling 911 and Tyler trying to comfort his injured brother. As he waited for the next train, Marcus reflected on what had just happened. He'd hoped his military days were behind him, but sometimes the past had a way of catching up. The skills he'd learned in the SEALs weren't just about fighting enemies overseas, they were about protecting innocent people from those who would do them harm. Tyler and his friends had learned a hard lesson tonight about the difference between posturing and real violence. Hopefully, it would be enough to keep them from making similar mistakes in the future. But, as Marcus boarded the train that would finally take him home, he had a feeling this wasn't over yet. Men like Danny didn't learn from defeat, they learned to plan better for the next attempt. The train pulled away from the platform, leaving behind 4 young men whose lives had just been changed forever. Tyler knelt beside his brother, watching the man who had humiliated them disappear into the darkness. In that moment, Tyler made a decision that would prove to be his biggest mistake yet. 2 weeks passed before Tyler made his next move. Danny was in the hospital for 3 days getting his shattered elbow reconstructed with metal pins and screws. The doctors said he might never have full use of that arm again. The police asked questions, but Danny stuck to the story about falling downstairs. He knew that admitting to attempted armed robbery wouldn't help his situation. During those 2 weeks, Tyler's anger festered like an infected wound. He replayed the encounter over and over in his mind, each time finding new reasons to hate the man who had humiliated his family. He convinced himself that the stranger had gotten lucky, that next time would be different. Tyler spent hours researching the train route, learning the schedule, watching the patterns of regular commuters. It took him 5 days of careful observation before he spotted Marcus again, getting on at the same station, same time, carrying his work clothes and the smell of fresh soil. This time, Tyler was patient. Instead of confronting Marcus directly, he followed him home, staying far enough back to avoid detection. He watched Marcus climb the stairs to a modest apartment building, noted which windows lit up, memorized the address. Over the next week, Tyler learned Marcus's routine. Morning coffee at a small cafe on the corner. Work truck loaded with landscaping equipment. Evening walks to the neighborhood grocery store. A quiet, predictable life that made Tyler's blood boil with resentment. "You sure about this?" Jake asked as they sat in Tyler's beat-up sedan outside Marcus's apartment building. It was nearly midnight, and the street was empty except for a few parked cars. "He broke my brother's arm," Tyler said through gritted teeth. "Put him in the hospital. Made us look like fools." Connor shifted nervously in the back seat. Maybe Danny was right. Maybe we should just let it go. But Danny wasn't there to voice his opinion. He was at home, struggling to do simple tasks with his left hand while his right arm healed. The doctors said he'd need months of physical therapy, and even then, he might never regain full strength. Tyler had recruited 2 new friends for tonight's mission. Marcus and Rico were older than Jake and Connor, with harder faces and fewer scruples. They'd done real time for serious crimes, and Tyler had promised them good money to help settle his score. "Remember," Tyler said, checking his watch, "we wait until he comes home. Then, we show him what happens when you mess with the wrong family." Marcus Thompson was having dinner with his neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow who lived alone and appreciated having someone to cook for occasionally. She'd made her famous pot roast, and Marcus had brought fresh vegetables from his garden. "You know," Mrs. Patterson said as they finished dessert, "you remind me of my late husband. He was in the service too. Had that same quiet way about him." Marcus smiled. "What branch?" "Marines. Korea." He never talked much about it, but I could tell it changed him. Made him careful, you know? Always aware of his surroundings. Marcus knew exactly what she meant. Even now, sitting in a cozy kitchen sharing apple pie, part of his mind was cataloging exits, noting the positions of potential weapons, listening for unusual sounds from the street below. "Mrs. Patterson," Marcus said carefully, "have you noticed anything strange in the neighborhood lately? Anyone hanging around who doesn't belong?" She thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, there was a car parked across the street this afternoon. Young men just sitting there for hours. I thought maybe they were waiting for someone." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. "What kind of car?" "Old blue sedan. Maybe 10 years old?" The boys inside looked rough, if you know what I mean. Marcus knew exactly what she meant. Tyler hadn't learned his lesson after all. "Mrs. Patterson," Marcus said, standing up, I want you to do me a favor. Tonight, keep your curtains closed and your doors locked. If you hear any commotion outside, don't look. Just call the police." Her face grew concerned. "Marcus, what's wrong?" "Probably nothing," Marcus said, though they both knew he didn't believe it. "Just being careful." Marcus thanked her for dinner and walked the short distance to his own building. As he climbed the stairs, his mind was already shifting into tactical mode. If Tyler was planning another confrontation, it would likely happen soon. Probably tonight, when Marcus would be tired and off guard. Marcus entered his apartment and immediately began preparing. First, he called his old teammate Rodriguez. "Marcus? It's late, brother. Everything okay? Remember that situation I mentioned? The kids on the train? I think it's escalating." Rodriguez's voice became serious. "You need backup?" "Not yet. But, if you don't hear from me by tomorrow morning, call Detective Sarah Martinez at the 14th Precinct. Tell her Marcus Thompson needs assistance at 1247 Oak Street." "Copy that. You sure you don't want me to come over?" Marcus looked out his window at the empty street below. The blue sedan was parked under a broken streetlight, barely visible in the shadows. "I'm sure. This is personal. They came looking for me specifically." After hanging up, Marcus moved through his apartment with practiced efficiency. He pushed furniture against the door, creating obstacles that would slow down intruders. He opened the windows in his bedroom, establishing an escape route to the fire escape. Most importantly, he retrieved a locked case from his closet. Inside the case were items from his military days that he'd hoped never to need again. Body armor. Night vision goggles. A combat knife with a 7-inch blade. And his service pistol, a .45 caliber Glock that had saved his life more times than he cared to remember. Marcus loaded the magazine and chambered a round, then set the gun within easy reach. He wasn't planning to hurt anyone, but he also wasn't planning to be a victim. At 2 a.m., they came. Marcus heard the first footstep on the exterior fire escape and was instantly awake. His apartment was dark, but he'd memorized every inch of it years ago. Moving silently, he positioned himself behind the kitchen counter with a clear view of both the front door and the window. Tyler had learned enough from their previous encounters to plan more carefully this time. Instead of a direct assault, he'd set Rico and Marcus around to the fire escape while he, Jake, and Connor approached through the building's front entrance. The window slid open slowly, and Rico's head appeared, scanning the dark apartment. He saw nothing suspicious and motioned for Marcus to follow. Both men were armed with crowbars and had knives on their belts. At the same time, Tyler was picking the lock on the front door with surprising skill. Apparently, he'd learned more than just violence from his older brother. Marcus waited until both intruders were inside the apartment before making his move. Rico was halfway across the living room when a voice spoke from the darkness. "That's far enough." Rico spun toward the sound, raising his crowbar, but he couldn't see anything in the blackness. "I know there are 5 of you," Marcus continued, his voice calm and controlled. 2 came through the window. 3 are about to come through the front door. Here's what's going to happen. You're all going to leave. Now. Before this gets worse for everyone." "Screw that," Rico snarled, swinging the crowbar toward the voice. Marcus moved like a ghost in the darkness. Rico felt the crowbar snatched from his hands, then experienced a moment of pure terror as something cold and sharp pressed against his throat. "I said leave," Marcus whispered in Rico's ear. "This is your only warning." The front door burst open, and Tyler charged in with Jake and Connor behind him. They found Rico standing in the middle of the room with his hands raised, but they couldn't see Marcus anywhere. "Where is he?" Tyler demanded. "Right here," Marcus said from behind them. Tyler spun around and found himself staring down the barrel of Marcus's pistol. The laser sight painted a red dot on his forehead. "You just broke into my home," Marcus said quietly. "Threatened my safety. Brought weapons into my space. In most states, that gives me the legal right to defend myself with lethal force. Jake and Connor immediately raised their hands. They'd signed up for intimidation, not a gunfight with someone who clearly knew how to handle weapons. Tyler's face twisted with rage and humiliation. You can't just shoot us. There are witnesses. What witnesses? Marcus asked. Your friends? They'll tell the police you broke into a stranger's home in the middle of the night? That you came here armed and looking for trouble? Tyler looked around at his companions and realized his position was hopeless. Marcus was right, nobody would believe they were innocent victims in this situation. Besides, Marcus continued, I don't need to shoot you. Rico, tell them what happened to the last guy who pulled a knife on me. Rico, still shaken from having a blade at his throat, spoke quietly. He said some guy named Danny is in the hospital. Broken arm. Might never work right again. Your brother didn't tell you the whole story, did he, Tyler? Marcus asked. He didn't mention that he came at me with a switchblade. That I could have killed him instead of just breaking his arm. Tyler's confidence cracked a little more. You're bluffing. Marcus lowered the pistol slightly. Am I? You've been watching me for 2 weeks. Following me home. Learning my routine. Do I seem like someone who bluffs? The apartment fell silent except for the sound of 5 men breathing heavily. Tyler looked at his companions and saw fear in their eyes. This wasn't going the way he'd planned. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus said. You're going to leave my home. You're going to leave my neighborhood. You're never going to come near me again. And, in exchange, I'm not going to call the police and report this break-in. That's it? Connor asked, hardly believing they were being offered a way out. That's it, Marcus confirmed. Unless you'd prefer to explain to a judge why 5 men with weapons broke into a veteran's apartment in the middle of the night. Tyler's pride screamed at him to fight, to not back down again. But, looking into Marcus's steady gray eyes, he finally understood what his brother had tried to tell him from his hospital bed. This wasn't some random middle-aged guy. This was a predator, someone who had killed people professionally and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. We're leaving, Tyler said quietly. Smart choice, Marcus replied. Tyler. Tyler stopped at the door and looked back. This is the last time I'm going to be reasonable about this. If there's a next time, it won't be your brother in the hospital. It'll be you in the ground. Do we understand each other? Tyler nodded, unable to find his voice. Marcus watched through his window as the 5 men got into their car and drove away. He knew Tyler well enough by now to believe this really was over. The young man's pride was strong, but his survival instinct was stronger. Marcus called Rodriguez back. Crisis averted. They showed up? 5 of them. Armed. Broke into my apartment. Jesus, Marcus. Are you okay? I'm fine. They're gone. Won't be back. You sure about that? Marcus looked out at the empty street. Yeah. I'm sure. The next morning, Marcus was trimming roses in Mrs. Patterson's garden when she brought him a cup of coffee. I heard some commotion last night, she said carefully. Just some young men who got lost, Marcus replied. They found their way home. She studied his face for a moment, then nodded. Good. This is a nice neighborhood. Quiet. We like to keep it that way. Yes, ma'am. We do. 3 months later, Marcus read in the local newspaper that Tyler Morrison had been arrested for armed robbery at a convenience store across town. Apparently, he'd finally picked a target that turned out to be an off-duty police officer. Marcus cut out the article and put it in his desk drawer, a reminder of what happened when young men chose violence over wisdom. He hoped Tyler would use his time in prison to think about the choices that had led him there. Marcus went back to his roses, to his quiet life, to the peace he'd found after years of war. Sometimes violence found him, but he always tried to handle it with the minimum force necessary. After all, some lessons could only be learned the hard way. Tyler Morrison served 18 months in state prison. During his time inside, he had plenty of opportunity to think about the man who had twice defeated him without breaking a sweat. Other inmates told him stories about military special forces, about the kind of training that turned ordinary men into living weapons. Tyler finally understood that he'd been lucky. Marcus Thompson could have killed him 3 different times and been legally justified in doing so. Instead, he'd chosen restraint, given Tyler chances to walk away. When Tyler was released, he moved to another state and got a job in construction. He never returned to Chicago, never tried to find Marcus Thompson again. He'd learned, finally, and completely, that some people were simply the wrong ones to challenge. Marcus continued his landscaping business, creating beauty in the world one garden at a time. He never saw Tyler again, but he sometimes thought about him, hoping the young man had found a better path. In the end, that was all any of them could do: learn from their mistakes and try to build something better than what they destroyed.